My name is Margaret Claire Sullivan, and I am 78 years old. For nearly 7 decades, I have carried a secret that has shaped every day of my life. Today, I am finally ready to share that secret with you. But first, let me tell you about the phone call that made me realize I had to speak. 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in my kitchen reading the morning paper and enjoying my coffee when the phone rang. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Sarah Henderson, grandmother to an 8-year-old girl named Emma. "Mrs. Sullivan?" she said, her voice tight with worry. "I got your number from the community center. They said you used to work with troubled children. I'm concerned about my granddaughter Emma. She's been having nightmares every night for 2 months. She flinches when adults touch her, even me. And yesterday, she asked me if some secrets are okay to keep from parents." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands began shaking because I recognized those signs. I had lived them myself when I was not much older than Emma. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, my voice trembling despite my 78 years of experience. "I think you need to sit down with Emma today and ask her some very gentle questions about whether anyone has been touching her in ways that make her uncomfortable." The phone call that followed was difficult but necessary. Mrs. Henderson discovered that Emma's step-uncle had been sexually abusing her for 3 months. The important difference from my own story is that Emma got help within days, instead of suffering in silence for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma's frightened face when her grandmother brought her to thank me the following week. But I also saw hope in Emma's eyes, hope that came from being believed, immediately protected quickly, and surrounded by adults who put her safety above everything else. That's when I realized my story needed to be told. Not because I need to tell it, I found peace with my past long ago, but because someone else might need to hear it. My heart started racing again, but this time with purpose instead of fear. If my words can help even one child find their voice sooner, or help one adult recognize the warning signs, then breaking my silence after 70 years will serve a greater purpose than my own comfort. I was born and raised in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina in a small town called Cedar Valley, where everyone knew their neighbor's business and family secrets were guarded more carefully than buried treasure. Our house sat on 25 acres of rocky mountain soil that my great-grandfather had claimed in 1898. It was a simple 2-story wooden structure painted yellow with a wraparound porch, where my mother, Catherine, grew tomatoes in old coffee cans and hung laundry to dry in the mountain breeze. My father, Thomas Sullivan, worked our land with the steady determination of a man who understood that every season was a gamble against weather and circumstances beyond his control. He was a gentle-spoken man with calloused hands and a slight Irish accent inherited from his immigrant father. When he smiled, which he did often in those early years, his whole face lit up with warmth that made everyone around him feel safe and valued. My mother was the heart of our small world. She hummed Irish ballads while kneading bread every morning at 5 o'clock. She told us stories of brave princesses and clever heroes during thunderstorms. Somehow, she made our modest home feel like the richest place on earth, with her laughter and her way of finding something special in every ordinary day. I was the eldest of 3 children. My brother Daniel was 2 years younger than me, with bright red hair, freckles across his nose, and an endless curiosity about how everything worked. He was always taking apart clocks to see their insides, or trying to catch fireflies to study how they made light. Little Anna, barely 5 years old, followed me everywhere, like a devoted shadow, her blonde curls bouncing as she tried to match my longer strides. Our lives followed the predictable rhythm of mountain seasons and Sunday church bells. We were poor by any economic measure, but we didn't feel poor. We had family dinners where we said grace and shared stories about our day. We had summer evenings catching lightning bugs in mason jars. We had winter nights huddled around the coal stove, listening to radio programs that transported us to faraway places we had never seen. Living with us was my paternal grandfather Cornelius Sullivan, who had moved in 8 months earlier after my grandmother Rose died from a sudden stroke. At 71, Grandfather Cornelius was still an imposing man with broad shoulders and hands that were permanently stained from decades of construction work in Asheville. His silver beard was always perfectly trimmed, and his pale blue eyes seemed to see everything that happened around him. Everyone in Cedar Valley respected him deeply. Old Cornelius built half the houses in this county, people would say at church or in Murphy's General Store. Salt of the earth, that man. Raised 5 children after his first wife died. Young worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. What no one knew, what I wouldn't discover until many years later, was that Grandfather Cornelius had already begun writing letters to my father in early 1955, letters that would play a crucial role in what happened later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. On March 15, 1955, when I was 12 years old, everything I thought I knew about family safety and trust would be destroyed in a single day. But the events of that day would also set in motion a chain of consequences that would eventually save not just my life, but the lives of countless other children. The morning began with an ominous feeling that I couldn't identify at the time. I woke earlier than usual to the sound of my mother coughing in the next room, not her usual gentle throat clearing, but harsh, violent spasms that seemed to shake the thin walls of our house. When I ran to my parents' bedroom, I found Mother sitting on the edge of the bed in her white cotton nightgown, her face flushed with fever, and her breathing labored. Even from across the room, I could feel the heat radiating from her body like a furnace. "Mama," I whispered, frightened by how small and fragile she looked. She tried to give me her usual reassuring smile, but I could see the worry in her green eyes. "Just a little chest cold, sweetheart," she said, though her voice sounded strange and raspy. "It'll pass soon enough." But it didn't pass. As the morning progressed, Mother's condition worsened rapidly. Her fever climbed higher, her breathing became increasingly difficult, and her lips began to turn a frightening shade of blue that I now know was cyanosis from lack of oxygen. Father, who normally would have been in the tobacco fields by sunrise, stayed home because of the severity of Mother's illness. By noon, his face was tight with fear as he made the difficult decision that would change everything. "I'm taking Catherine to the hospital in Asheville," he announced, his usual calm demeanor cracking as he wrapped Mother in quilts. The nearest hospital was 42 miles away on mountain roads that could be treacherous in March weather. "Margaret, you're in charge of Daniel and Anna until I get back. I don't know how long this will take." "I'll keep watch over the young ones," Thomas, Grandfather Cornelius said, placing what seemed like a reassuring hand on Father's shoulder. "You focus on getting Catherine the medical attention she needs. Don't worry about anything here at home." Father nodded gratefully, then lifted Mother in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. As he carried her toward our old pickup truck, she turned her head to look at me one final time. "Take care of your brother and sister Margaret," she whispered, her voice so weak I could barely hear it over the wind that had begun howling through the mountain peaks. "I'll be home before you know it." Those were the last words my mother ever spoke to me, though I wouldn't know it for several agonizing hours yet. The day that followed felt endless and heavy, with dread I couldn't name. I tried to maintain some sense of normal routine for Daniel and Anna, making cornbread and beans, the way Mother had taught me, though everything came out wrong, the bread too dense, the beans too salty. I invented games to distract them from asking when Mama was coming home, but I could see the worry growing in Daniel's eyes as the hours passed. Grandfather Cornelius spent most of the day on the front porch smoking his pipe and staring at the darkening sky. Occasionally he would come inside to check on us, but he seemed lost in his own thoughts, more distant than I had ever seen him. When evening came, without any word from Father, I put my siblings to bed with heavy hearts that felt like stones in our chests. Daniel, old enough to sense that something terrible might be happening, lay awake for a long time, asking questions I couldn't answer. Anna, too young to understand the gravity of the situation, fell asleep quickly after I told her one of Mother's favorite stories about a princess who always found her way home. It was nearly 10 o'clock when I finally heard the familiar sound of our truck's engine struggling up the steep driveway. I ran to the window, my heart pounding with hope and dread battling in my chest. But when I looked outside, I saw only Father emerging from the vehicle alone, his shoulders shaking with grief that was visible even in the darkness. The moment he walked through our kitchen door, I knew that our world had ended forever. Father's eyes were swollen and red from crying. His face had aged 10 years in a single day, and his normally straight posture was bent like that of a much older man. He stood in our kitchen doorway, still wearing his good Sunday coat now wrinkled and stained with tears. "Where's Mama?" I asked, though my heart was already breaking, with the answer I could see written across his devastated face. Father's voice cracked as he struggled to form the words. "Your mother. The pneumonia was too advanced by the time we got to the hospital. The doctors tried everything they could, but her lungs were already filled with fluid. There was nothing more they could do. She's gone, Margaret. She's gone forever." The words hit me like a physical blow to my chest. I felt my knees buckle and the room spin around me as the impossible became horribly real. Mother had been making breakfast just that morning, humming Danny Boy, while she worked planning to plant marigolds in the garden next week. How could she simply be gone forever? Father pulled me into his arms, and we both cried as the magnitude of our loss settled over us like a suffocating blanket. Through the thin walls of our house, I could hear Grandfather Cornelius moving around in the kitchen, but he gave us space to grieve together for those first terrible minutes. "The funeral arrangements are already made," Father said eventually, his voice hollow and strange in a way I had never heard before. "I'll bring her home tomorrow morning so we can have the viewing here the way it should be done. The whole community will want to pay their respects to Catherine." "Go get some rest, son," Grandfather Cornelius said quietly from the doorway, his voice unusually gentle. "The road was long and hard, and tomorrow will be even harder. I'll help Margaret with anything that needs to be done tonight." Father looked at me with eyes full of pain and something else, a desperate trust that felt too heavy for my 12-year-old shoulders to bear. "Can you be strong for Daniel and Anna Margaret? Just until we get through the next few days?" "Yes, Papa," I whispered, swallowing my tears and trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I can be strong." After Father retreated to the bedroom he had shared with Mother, where I could hear his muffled sobs through the walls for hours, I sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing while my mind tried to process what had happened. The familiar room suddenly felt foreign and empty without Mother's presence filling every corner. Grandfather Cornelius sat across from me, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey from the bottle we kept for medicinal purposes and special occasions. The amber liquid caught the lamplight as he raised it to his lips with shaking hands. "Drink this," he said, sliding the glass toward me after taking a long sip. "It'll help numb the pain, child. Make it easier to bear what can't be changed." I hesitated, staring at the glass while my head spun with grief and exhaustion. I had never tasted alcohol in my life, and I knew Mother would disapprove. But Mother wasn't there anymore to disapprove of anything, and the ache in my chest felt like it might actually kill me if I didn't find some way to make it stop. I took a small sip, gasping as the whiskey burned my throat and brought fresh tears to my eyes. Then I took another sip, larger this time, as the liquid seemed to blur the sharp edges of my grief and make everything feel slightly less real. "That's right," Grandfather murmured, approvingly, refilling the glass when I had emptied it. "Life is hard, Margaret, harder than most people want to admit. Better to learn that truth early before it catches you unprepared and destroys you completely." I don't remember how many glasses I drank that night. I only know that the world gradually became fuzzy and distant, my thoughts growing confused, and my body feeling strangely disconnected from my mind. At some point, I'm not sure when, Grandfather got up from his chair and came around to my side of the table. "Come on, child," he said in a voice that seemed strangely soft and different from his usual gruff tone. Let me help you get to bed. You need to sleep off this grief and this whiskey both." But instead of leading me to the room I shared with Anna, he guided my stumbling steps toward his own bedroom at the back of the house. In my confused and devastated state, I didn't question this decision. Maybe I thought it was better not to disturb my little sister with my crying. Maybe my alcohol-clouded mind simply couldn't think clearly enough to protest. What happened next exists in my memory, like fragments of a nightmare that I spent years trying to convince myself wasn't real. Rough hands exploring places on my child's body where no hands should ever go. Sharp tearing pain that made me cry out in confusion and terror. My desperate pleas being ignored as if I hadn't spoken at all. The crushing weight of a grown man's body on mine, far too small and weak to resist or escape. The smell of whiskey and pipe tobacco mixed with hot breath on my face. Whispered words that would haunt my dreams for decades. "You're the woman of the house now, Margaret. This is what women do for their families when they're needed." At some point during that endless night of violation, I must have lost consciousness from pain shock or alcohol, or perhaps all three. My next clear memory is of waking up the following morning in my own bed, lying next to Anna, who was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that our world had changed forever in ways she couldn't imagine. For one blessed moment, I thought that everything, Mother's illness, her death, the violation that followed, had been nothing more than a cruel nightmare brought on by grief and exhaustion. Then I tried to sit up and felt the sharp pain between my legs. I saw the dark stains on my nightgown and the bruises on my arms where strong fingers had gripped too tightly. It hadn't been a nightmare. It was all horrifyingly, devastatingly real. My mother was dead, and on the same night I lost her forever. I had also lost my childhood, my innocence, my faith that adults could be trusted to protect children instead of hurting them when they were most vulnerable. In that moment, something fundamental inside me shut down, not from weakness, but as a survival mechanism my 12-year-old mind created to help me function. An iron gate descended over my emotions, locking away everything that felt too dangerous to experience fully. I got up carefully, trying not to wake Anna, and made my way to the wash basin where I cleaned myself with trembling hands and hid the stained nightgown at the bottom of our laundry basket. When I looked at myself in the small mirror above the washstand, a stranger stared back at me. Still, a 12-year-old girl's face, but with eyes that had aged decades overnight. I went to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast the way Mother always had, because maintaining normalcy was the only thing standing between me and complete collapse. Today was the day of Mother's viewing, and I knew our house would soon be filled with neighbors and relatives offering condolences and help. Father was already awake, his eyes swollen from crying, and his face marked by a night of anguish. When he saw me moving around the kitchen with mechanical efficiency, he pulled me into another hug. "I'm so proud of how strong you're being, Margaret," he said, his voice still rough with grief. "Your mother would be proud too." Those words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt like knives twisting in my chest. If he knew what had happened while he was mourning his wife, would he still be proud? Or would he blame me for somehow bringing shame to our family in its darkest hour? "I'm going to bring your mother home now," Father continued, reaching for his coat. "Can you manage things here with the little ones until I get back?" "I'll keep an eye on everything, Thomas," Grandfather Cornelius said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his usual composed demeanor, as if nothing terrible had happened just hours before. "Margaret and I will make sure everything is ready for folks to pay their respects to Catherine." Father nodded gratefully and left, while I stood frozen at the stove, unable to look at the man who had destroyed my world just hours earlier. But Grandfather Cornelius acted as if nothing had happened, discussing funeral arrangements and meal preparations in the same calm tone he had always used. Remember what I told you last night, Margaret? He said quietly when we were alone, his voice carrying a threat disguised as advice. About keeping family matters private. Your father has enough grief without you adding to it with wild stories that would only cause more pain. You don't want to be responsible for breaking what's left of this family, do you? And with those words, he trapped me in a prison of terrified silence that would hold me captive for almost a year to come. The weeks following Mother's funeral passed in a haze of casseroles brought by well-meaning neighbors, condolences whispered in church pews, and the desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of normal family life while everything felt broken beyond repair. The entire community of Cedar Valley rallied around us in their traditional way, bringing food that would last for weeks and helping Father with the spring planting that couldn't wait for grief to subside. Mrs. Patterson from down the road came twice a week to help with laundry. The men from church took turns helping Father with the heavier farm work. But while everyone saw a family bravely coping with tragedy, the reality inside our house was far different and much darker. Father threw himself into farm work with desperate intensity, leaving before dawn and returning well after sunset, as if he could somehow outrun his sorrow in the tobacco fields and vegetable gardens. His absence, while understandable, left me alone with Grandfather Cornelius far too often. And my grandfather, emboldened by my silence about that first terrible night, began to treat me as his property. Our little secret, he would whisper after each violation, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. Remember what I told you about protecting your father from more pain. You're a good girl, Margaret. You understand that some burdens are too heavy for grieving men to handle. The abuse became systematic and calculated. He waited for moments when Father was away, and my siblings were at the one-room schoolhouse 2 miles down the mountain. There was always an excuse: help me move this heavy trunk from the attic, or come to the root cellar and fetch some preserves for dinner. I learned to recognize the predatory look in his eyes, the particular tone his voice took when he was planning something terrible. I developed small strategies of survival that probably saved my sanity, if not my life. I began sleeping with sewing scissors hidden under my pillow, though I was never brave enough to use them. I taught myself to wake at the slightest unusual sound to remain alert even in sleep. I volunteered for every possible errand that would take me away from the house, walking to neighbors, to borrow ingredients, taking longer routes to and from school, lingering after church services, to help the preacher's wife clean up. But I was 12 years old in 1955 in a small mountain community where children obeyed adults without question, and family business stayed strictly private. My resistance could only go so far before it became obvious rebellion that would require explanation I couldn't give. The abuse changed me in ways that I'm still understanding today, even at 78 years old. I stopped laughing at Daniel's jokes or joining in Anna's games. I flinched when anyone touched me, unexpectedly, even Father's gentle hands. I began having nightmares so vivid and terrifying that I would wake up screaming, bringing Father running to comfort me without ever understanding the real source of my terror. "It's just grief, sweetheart," he would say, stroking my hair in the darkness while being careful not to hold me too tightly. "Missing your mama so much that it comes out in bad dreams. The hurt will get easier with time, I promise you that." But time wasn't healing anything. If anything, the situation was getting worse as Grandfather Cornelius became bolder and more demanding with each passing week. At school, my teacher, Mrs. Henderson, began to notice changes in my behavior and academic performance. "Margaret seems very distracted lately," she told Father during a parent conference in October. "Her grades are still excellent. She's always been one of our brightest students, but she's withdrawn from the other children. She sits alone at lunch, doesn't participate in group activities, and seems to be carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. She's taken on a lot of responsibility at home since Catherine passed." Father explained, unknowingly providing the perfect cover story for my withdrawal and exhaustion. "Maybe too much responsibility for a child her age. She insists on doing all the cooking and housework, taking care of Daniel and Anna like she's their mother instead of their sister. I keep telling her she's still a child, but she won't listen. Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. Grief affects children in different ways. Some become clingy and dependent, others become overly responsible and mature beyond their years. Just make sure she knows she can talk to you about anything that might be troubling her. If only it were that simple. If only I believed that telling the truth wouldn't destroy what was left of our family. The one ray of hope in those dark months came from Father's sister, Aunt Patricia, who lived in the county seat of Marion. She was a childless widow in her 50s who had married well. Her late husband had owned the largest hardware store in 3 counties, and she took her role as our only remaining relative very seriously. Every few weeks, Aunt Patricia would make the long drive up the winding mountain road to check on us, bringing store-bought cookies for the children and sharp-eyed observation of our family dynamics. She was a practical woman with prematurely gray hair and an ability to see through polite pretenses that made me both hopeful and terrified. This child is getting too thin," she told Father one Sunday afternoon in November, when she thought I couldn't hear their conversation in the parlor. And those dark circles under her eyes, when was the last time she had a proper night's sleep? She looks like she's carrying secrets too heavy for a child. She has nightmares sometimes. Father admitted, his voice heavy with concern and helplessness. About her mother, I think. She wakes up crying and can't get back to sleep for hours. I've tried talking to her about it, but she just says she's fine and changes the subject. Have you considered that maybe she needs a complete change of scenery? She could come stay with me in Marion for a while, just until she gets back on her feet emotionally. I have plenty of room in that big house, and she could attend the better school there. Get away from all the memories that are keeping her stuck in grief. Father's face brightened with something like hope for the first time in months. Would you really do that? I've been worried sick about her taking on too much responsibility, trying to replace Catherine, instead of just being a child who's allowed to grieve. But before the conversation could progress any further, Grandfather Cornelius inserted himself into the discussion with the authority of the family patriarch and the man who had been helping us survive since Mother's death. "The girl belongs here with her family," he said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "She needs to learn to handle responsibility and hardship, not run away from it when things get difficult. Besides, who would help with Daniel and Anna if Margaret went gallivanting off to the city?" Aunt Patricia's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite identify at the time, but which I now recognize as suspicion mixed with frustration. "I'm sure Thomas could manage with help from neighbors, or perhaps hire a local woman to assist with the children. Margaret needs to be a child, not a replacement mother and housekeeper." She's fine where she is," Grandfather replied with finality that ended the conversation. "We're family. We take care of our own problems without involving outsiders who don't understand our situation." The discussion ended there, but I saw something pass between Aunt Patricia and Grandfather Cornelius, a mutual recognition of conflict that neither was willing to address directly. She had sensed that something was wrong, but couldn't put her finger on exactly what it was. As winter deepened and my situation became increasingly desperate, I began to experience what I now understand were the early symptoms of severe depression and trauma. The violations were becoming more frequent and more violent. Grandfather Cornelius seemed to be testing how much I would endure in silence, how far he could push me before I broke completely. One particularly bad night in February, after he had been drinking more heavily than usual, I managed to lock myself in the small bathroom just moments before he reached me. He pounded on the door for what felt like hours, his voice alternating between wheedling promises and vicious threats. "Open this door right now, Margaret, or I'll tell your father you've been stealing money from his wallet to buy candy at Murphy's store. He'll send you to reform school for wayward girls, and what will happen to Daniel and Anna, then you know they need you to take care of them." I pressed my back against the door, tears streaming down my face, knowing that eventually I would have to come out and face whatever punishment he had planned for my resistance. But that night, For the first time in months, I felt something other than helpless terror rising in my chest. I felt anger, a small but genuine flame of rage at the injustice of my situation. It was a turning point, though I didn't recognize it at the time. That tiny spark of righteous anger would eventually grow into the strength I needed, not just to survive, but to fight back. But first, I needed to discover something that would change everything, that I wasn't carrying this burden entirely alone. What I'm about to tell you now, I didn't learn until many years later. But to understand what happened in March of 1956, you need to know about the letters that had been arriving at our house since February of the previous year. Letters that explained why Father's behavior began to change in the weeks leading up to our final confrontation. In February of 1956, I noticed Father acting strangely. He would receive mail addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize, always reading these letters privately, when he thought no one was watching. Afterward, his face would take on a troubled expression that lasted for hours. He began watching me more carefully, asking questions about my health, my sleep, whether anything specific was troubling me beyond grief for Mother. I also noticed him finding excuses to come home from the fields during the day, appearing unexpectedly at moments when I would normally be alone with Grandfather Cornelius. "Just forgot my water jug," he would say, or "thought I'd check on that loose board in the kitchen that's been squeaking." But I could see him studying both of us with new attention, as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite grasp. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until 1977, when I was helping Father move his belongings after Aunt Patricia's death, was that those letters had been coming from Grandfather Cornelius himself. I found them in a box in Father's closet, tied with a piece of string and labeled in Father's handwriting, "Cornelius, 1956. There were 7 letters total, all written in my grandfather's careful script, all mailed from town instead of simply handed over at home. Now, I will tell you what those letters said, because they explain everything that happened afterward. February 12, 1956. Thomas, I am writing this because I cannot speak the words aloud. Since Catherine's death, I have done terrible things. The grief of losing my Rose, then losing Catherine so soon after, has driven me to madness. I have been inappropriate with Margaret. I know it is wrong. I know it is sinful. But I cannot seem to stop myself. I am asking you to help me find the strength to change before I cause more harm. Your father, February 26, 1956. Thomas, I tried to stop as I promised in my last letter, but I failed. The devil has hold of me, and I am weak. Margaret has not told you because she is trying to protect our family from scandal. She is a good girl who doesn't deserve what I have done to her. I am begging you to find a way to help me before I destroy her completely. Your father. The letters continued in this pattern. Confession promises to change, admissions of failure. Pleas for help. The final letter, dated March 10, 1956, was different. Thomas, I know you have been watching us. I know you suspect. Margaret deserves better than what I have given her. If you confront me, I will not deny what I have done. The child has suffered enough. Do what you must to protect her. Your father. Reading those letters 21 years later, my hands shook and my heart raced as I finally understood what had been happening in the background of my nightmare. Father had known. He had been watching, waiting, gathering courage to act. The guilt he must have carried, knowing what was happening, but needing proof, needing to be certain before he destroyed his own father. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me return to March of 1956, when I was still a terrified 13-year-old who thought she was completely alone. The crisis that would finally end my nightmare came on a rainy Saturday when Father had supposedly gone to Marion to buy seed for spring planting. Daniel and Anna were at the Morrison farm helping with a new litter of puppies. I was alone in the kitchen, washing dishes and trying to stay invisible, when I heard Grandfather Cornelius's heavy footsteps approaching. My whole body tensed with the familiar dread as he entered the room. Over the past year, I had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict his moods and intentions, and everything about his posture and expression told me that this would be worse than usual. "Come with me, Margaret," he ordered, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant resistance would only make things worse. "I have something to show you in the barn that you need to see." But something inside me had finally reached its breaking point. Maybe it was the accumulation of a year's worth of violations. Maybe it was the small flame of anger that had been growing since that night I locked myself in the bathroom. Maybe it was simply that I had absorbed as much pain as one person could hold without breaking entirely. "No," I said quietly, continuing to scrub the cast-iron skillet in my hands without turning around. The word seemed to echo in the kitchen like a gunshot. In all the months of abuse, I had never directly refused him. I had pleaded, I had tried to hide, I had found small ways to resist, but I had never simply said no with such finality. "What did you say to me?" His voice carried a dangerous edge that made my heart race with terror, but also with something new determination. I said no. This time I turned to face him, my hands dripping soapy water onto the floor, my chin raised in defiance that surprised us both. "I won't go with you. I won't do what you want anymore. I'm tired of being afraid in my own home." His face darkened with rage, and he crossed the kitchen in 2 quick strides, grabbing my arm with enough force to leave finger-shaped bruises that would last for weeks. "You'll do exactly what I tell you, girl, or I'll make sure your father knows what a wicked, lying child he's been raising." That's when we both heard it, the sound of Father's truck in the driveway, returning hours earlier than expected. Grandfather Cornelius released me so quickly that I stumbled backward against the sink. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something new in his eyes, genuine fear. "Not a word," he hissed, backing toward his room. "Remember what I've told you about keeping secrets, or you'll destroy this family forever." But as I heard Father's footsteps on the front porch, I made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of protecting everyone else while no one protected me. I was tired of carrying this burden alone. I was tired of being afraid. It was time to tell the truth, no matter what the consequences might be. Father entered the kitchen, shaking rain from his coat, but he stopped short when he saw me standing rigidly by the sink, with tears streaming down my face and angry red marks on my arm where Grandfather Cornelius had grabbed me just moments before. "Margaret." His voice was sharp with concern, and something else, a readiness that suggested he had been expecting something like this moment. "What happened here? Who hurt you?" For almost a year, I had swallowed my truth to spare him additional pain during his grief. I had convinced myself that staying silent was noble, that protecting the family from scandal was more important than protecting myself from harm. But looking at his kind face, seeing the genuine love and concern in his eyes, I realized that my silence had protected no one except my abuser. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking as I thought, if Papa doesn't believe me, I'll lose everything. But if I don't tell him now, I'll lose myself completely. "Papa," I whispered, my voice shaking with fear and relief in equal measure. "I need to tell you something about Grandfather Cornelius. Something that's been happening since the night Mama died." I watched Father's expression change as the words poured out of me. Not all the details, I wasn't ready for that, but enough. I told him about inappropriate touching, about being forced to go places alone with Grandfather, about threats that kept me silent for so long. I told him about the fear that had consumed my life for almost a year. His face cycled through confusion, dawning understanding, and finally, a cold, terrible rage that I had never seen before. When I finished speaking, he was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Since the night Mama died. It started that very night when you were at the hospital." The sound he made wasn't quite human, a roar of anguish and fury that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He turned toward Grandfather Cornelius's room, and I knew that whatever happened next would change our lives forever. "Papa, wait!" I started to say, suddenly afraid of what he might do in his rage, but he was already storming down the hallway. I heard him kick open Grandfather's door with such force that it crashed against the wall. I heard the sound of furniture being overturned, voices raised in anger and accusation. "You bastard!" Father's voice thundered through the house. "How could you do this to her? How could you hurt my little girl when she was grieving her mother?" "She's lying." "Thomas!" Grandfather Cornelius shouted back, but his voice sounded different, less confident than usual. "She's a disturbed child who's been making up stories since Catherine died. You can't believe these fantasies. Don't you dare call my daughter a liar. I've been watching you for weeks, waiting for proof of what I suspected. I've seen the way she flinches when you come near her. I've seen the bruises, the fear in her eyes. And I've read your letters, you sick old man. Every single one of them. I know exactly what you've been doing to her." The revelation about the letters stunned me. Father had known he had been watching and waiting. I felt a mixture of relief that I hadn't been as alone as I thought, and confusion about why he hadn't acted sooner. The shouting match continued for several more minutes before I heard heavy footsteps returning down the hallway. Father appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face pale, but determined, his knuckles bloody from what I assumed had been physical confrontation. "Pack a bag, Margaret," he said firmly, his voice steady despite everything that had just happened. "We're leaving this house today, and we're never coming back." "Leaving, but Papa, where will we go? This is our home." "Home is supposed to be a place where children are safe," he replied, his jaw tight with anger and determination. "This stopped being a home the moment he put his hands on you. We're going to your Aunt Patricia's in Marion. I should have listened to her months ago when she offered to take you in. She knew something was wrong, she's been trying to help us, and I was too blind with grief and family loyalty to see what was right in front of me." As I ran upstairs to pack my few belongings, I could hear Father on the telephone speaking in urgent clipped sentences to Aunt Patricia, then to the Morrison family to arrange for Daniel and Anna to be collected. His voice was calm and practical, but I could hear the underlying fury that hadn't yet cooled. Within 2 hours, we were driving down the mountain road with everything we owned packed into the back of Father's old truck. I sat between my confused siblings, watching our house disappear behind the mountains as we wound our way toward an uncertain future. "Are we ever going back home?" Anna asked, her small voice filled with worry. Father's jaw tightened as he navigated the steep curves, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. "No, sweetheart. We're going to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere safe. Aunt Patricia has a big house with room for all of us, and you'll like the town school much better than our little mountain school." "What about Grandfather Cornelius?" Daniel asked. "Is he coming with us?" "No," Father replied firmly. "Grandfather Cornelius will not be part of our family anymore. He made choices that mean he can't be around children, so he'll have to find somewhere else to live." I pressed my face against the cold window and watched the familiar mountains fade into the distance, feeling a strange mixture of relief and loss. That house contained my worst memories, but also my best ones. Memories of Mother singing lullabies, of family dinners around the kitchen table, of feeling safe and loved before everything went wrong. As we drove toward our new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: hope. Not just for safety, but for the possibility that I might someday feel like a child again, instead of a victim carrying terrible secrets. But I also felt something else: gratitude for a father who had believed me, protected me, and chosen my safety over family loyalty when it mattered most. Aunt Patricia and her second husband, Uncle Herbert, welcomed us into their large Marion home with open arms and carefully worded questions that showed they understood something serious had happened without prying for details I wasn't ready to share. They had prepared bedrooms for each of us children, the first time in my life I'd had a room entirely to myself, and stocked the kitchen with food to last for weeks. Most importantly, they treated our arrival not as a burden, but as a blessing that filled their childless home with the family life they had always wanted. "You're safe now," Aunt Patricia whispered as she tucked me into bed that first night, her practical hands smoothing the clean quilt with gentle efficiency. "Whatever happened back there, it's over now. No one will hurt you here, and anyone who tries will have to answer to all of us." I wanted to believe her, but trauma doesn't disappear simply because you change your address. The nightmares continued now, featuring not just Grandfather Cornelius, but also guilt about breaking up our family and forcing Father to abandon his childhood home. I lay awake many nights wondering if Father would eventually blame me for the disruption I had caused, if Daniel and Anna would resent me for uprooting their lives. But Father never showed anything except protective love and remorse for not acting sooner. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he told me one evening as we sat together on Aunt Patricia's front porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening sooner. I was so lost in my own grief that I failed in my most important job, protecting my children from harm." "It wasn't your fault, Papa," I replied, meaning it completely. "You couldn't have known if I didn't tell you." "Yes, I could have, and I should have. The signs were all there, your nightmares, your fear, the way you changed after your mother died. I received those letters from my father for months, but I was too shocked and confused to act immediately. I needed time to process what he was telling me to watch and confirm what was happening." His voice broke slightly. "I'm your father. Keeping you safe is my responsibility, and I failed you when you needed me most." "You didn't fail me, Papa. When I finally found the courage to tell you the truth, you believed me immediately and protected me. That's what mattered most." "It will never happen again, Margaret," he said, putting his arm around me with careful deliberation, so I could see the gesture coming first. "I promise you that, with everything I have, you will never have to be afraid in your own home again." And he kept that promise completely. Father found work at a lumber mill in Marion, taking a significant pay cut from farming, but gaining the security of steady wages and the peace of mind that came from knowing his children were safe. He slowly began rebuilding our lives in a place where no one knew our story, where we could start fresh, without the weight of whispered speculation following us everywhere. Aunt Patricia enrolled me in Marion Elementary School, where I was academically ahead of my peers, but struggled socially. I was still too afraid to trust easily, too guarded to make friends quickly. The other children seemed so young and carefree compared to how I felt inside, like an old woman trapped in a 13-year-old's body. But my new teacher, Miss Roberts, saw something in me that others had missed. "You have a remarkable gift with words, Margaret," she told me after reading an essay I had written about overcoming fear. "Your writing shows insight and emotional depth that's very unusual for someone your age. Have you ever considered that you might want to become a teacher yourself someday, or perhaps a writer who helps people understand difficult experiences?" It was the first time anyone had suggested that I might have a future beyond simply surviving each day. The idea planted itself in my mind like a seed that would eventually grow into my life's purpose, though I was still too damaged to fully believe in the possibility of dreams coming true. Healing, I learned, is not a straight line from pain to wholeness. Some days I felt strong and optimistic about the future. Other days, seemingly minor triggers would send me spiraling back into fear and self-doubt. A teacher's raised voice and unexpected touch on my shoulder, Even certain smells or sounds could transport me instantly back to those terrible months of abuse. But gradually, surrounded by people who loved and protected me consistently, I began to remember who I had been before trauma changed everything. I started participating in class discussions again, discovering that I had opinions worth sharing. I joined the school chorus, finding that singing with others helped quiet the anxious voices in my head. I even made a tentative friendship with a girl named Susan Miller, who was patient with my moments of withdrawal and generous with invitations to normal teenage activities. High school brought new challenges and opportunities that helped me grow stronger. I threw myself into academics with fierce determination, earning straight A's and the respect of teachers who saw my potential. I joined the debate team, discovering that my experiences had given me a passion for justice and a talent for articulating complex arguments. I wrote for the school newspaper, learning that words could be powerful tools for truth-telling and positive change. My senior year English teacher, Mr. Davidson, was the first person to suggest that my painful experiences might actually become a source of strength in helping others. "You write about human nature and resilience with unusual understanding for someone your age," he told me after reading a story I had written about a girl overcoming adversity. "Have you ever considered that your insights into suffering and recovery might be gifts you could share with the world?" At 17, I wasn't ready to think about my trauma as a gift. But the seed of that idea was planted, waiting for the right time to grow into something meaningful and purposeful. The summer before my senior year brought an unexpected test of my healing progress that would show me how far I had come. Grandfather Cornelius appeared at our door one evening in June, looking older and more frail than I remembered his once proud bearing, stooped with age and what looked like genuine shame. "Thomas," he said when Father answered the door, his voice lacking its former authority and confidence. "I need to talk to you, son. Please, I have things I need to say before it's too late." I was in the kitchen helping Aunt Patricia prepare dinner when I heard his voice. My body reacted before my mind could process the sound. Heart-racing hands shaking, the familiar terror flooding back as if no time had passed at all. But I wasn't 12 years old anymore. I was nearly 18, taller and stronger, surrounded by people who loved and protected me unconditionally. More importantly, I had spent 2 years learning that I had value and worth beyond what anyone else said or did to me. "He can't come in," I said firmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice despite my racing heart. "I don't want to see him or hear anything he has to say." Father appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face troubled but determined. "He says he wants to apologize, Margaret, to make amends for what he did to you." "I don't care what he wants," I replied, and I meant it completely. He gave up the right to apologize when he chose to hurt me instead of protecting me. Some things can't be fixed with words, no matter how sorry someone claims to be. Father studied my face for a long moment, then nodded, with something that looked like pride in my strength and self-advocacy. "You're absolutely right. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. Your comfort and safety matter more than his need for forgiveness." I heard him return to the front door, heard the brief conversation that ended with Grandfather Cornelius leaving our lives forever. Through the window, I watched him walk slowly down the street, an old man carrying the weight of his own destructive actions. I felt no satisfaction in his obvious misery, but I also felt no pity or obligation to forgive him for his comfort. That encounter taught me something crucial about healing. Forgiveness isn't something you owe your abusers. It's something you choose for yourself when and if you're ready, and only if it serves your own peace of mind and recovery. High school graduation came in May of 1959, with me as valedictorian and recipient of a full scholarship to attend the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. As I stood at the podium delivering my commencement address to a gymnasium full of proud families and fellow graduates, I looked out at the sea of faces and felt something I hadn't experienced since before Mother's death: genuine excitement about the future and confidence in my ability to create the life I wanted. We stand at the threshold of adulthood. I told my classmates speaking words that came straight from my heart and experience, carrying with us not just our achievements and dreams, but also our challenges, our losses and our victories over circumstances that once seemed insurmountable. It is not what happens to us that defines us, but how we choose to respond to what happens to us, and how we use our experiences to help others. I was speaking to them, but I was also speaking to myself, to the frightened 12-year-old who had endured the unthinkable, to the teenager who had learned to trust again, to the young woman who was finally ready to build a life of her own, choosing based on purpose, rather than just survival. After the ceremony, Father pulled me aside, his eyes bright with tears of pride and joy. "Your mother would be so proud of who you've become, Margaret," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've grown into exactly the kind of woman she always hoped you would be: strong, compassionate, intelligent, and determined to make the world better than you found it." For the first time in 4 years, thinking about Mother brought more joy than pain. I was beginning to understand that trauma doesn't have to define your entire life story. It becomes part of your narrative, but it doesn't have to be the only chapter, or even the most important one. As I prepared to leave for university that fall, I made myself a promise that would guide every major decision for the rest of my life. I would use my education, my experiences, and my voice to ensure that other children wouldn't have to suffer in silence the way I had suffered. It was a promise that would shape my career, my relationships, and my understanding of my own purpose in ways I couldn't yet imagine. University opened up a world I had never imagined possible. Chapel Hill in 1959 was a place where ideas mattered more than family history, where intelligence was the most valuable currency, and where a girl from the mountains could reinvent herself completely if she had the courage and determination to do so. I chose education as my major with a minor in psychology, drawn by my own experience, to understand how trauma affects children's development and how healing happens in the human mind and heart. My professors quickly recognized that I brought a level of seriousness and maturity to my studies that set me apart from classmates who were experiencing their first taste of freedom from parental oversight. Miss Sullivan," Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell said after my child psychology class one day during my sophomore year, "Your insights into childhood trauma and resilience are remarkably sophisticated for an undergraduate student. Have you given any thought to graduate school?" The field desperately needs more educators who understand the complexities of working with troubled children from personal experience. Graduate school had seemed like an impossible dream. More years of study meant more expenses and more time before I could start earning money to help support Father and my siblings. But Dr. Hartwell explained that there were research assistantships available for exceptional students' positions that paid enough to live on while earning an advanced degree. "I'd be honored to recommend you for our master's program in educational psychology," she continued. "Your combination of academic ability and personal insight into trauma could make you an extraordinary advocate for vulnerable children." Before I could fully commit to an academic future, however, life intervened in the form of David Mitchell, a senior journalism major with plans to become a newspaper editor. He was tall and lean with unruly dark hair and an intensity about social justice issues that matched my own passion for protecting children from harm. We met in the library during finals week of my sophomore year, both of us surviving on coffee and determination. I was researching theories of child development and trauma recovery. He was writing an investigative piece about inequities in rural school funding that kept many children from receiving adequate education. "You know," he said, looking up from his typewriter after hours of working in companionable silence, "what you're studying and what I'm writing about are really the same issue. Children can't learn effectively if they don't feel safe and stable at home and at school." It was the beginning of a conversation that lasted through that night and in various forms continued for the next 3 years of our courtship. David was the first person outside my immediate family to whom I told my complete story. Not immediately, that level of trust took months of careful relationship building and gentle questions on his part. But eventually, on a warm spring evening during my junior year as we walked through the university's botanical gardens, I found myself speaking words I had never said aloud to anyone, except father and the therapist I had started seeing. "I was abused by my grandfather for almost a year," I said, the words hanging in the evening air, like a confession that could change everything between us. He stopped walking, his face cycling through shock anger, and what looked like profound sadness, not for himself, but for me, and what I had endured as a child. "Margaret," he said softly, reaching for my hand with careful deliberation, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. Thank you for trusting me with something so personal and painful." Not, "Are you sure it really happened?" Not, "Why didn't you tell someone sooner?" Not any of the responses I had feared. Just acknowledgement of my pain and gratitude for my trust in him. And it's why I want to work with children. I continued, surprised by how much lighter I felt after speaking the truth to someone who responded with compassion rather than judgment. To make sure they have adults, they can trust adults who will believe them and protect them when they find the courage to speak up about abuse. "It's why you're going to be an amazing teacher and advocate," he replied without hesitation. "And why the world desperately needs more people like you, people who understand what children go through and refuse to let them suffer alone." That conversation marked another crucial turning point in my healing journey. Speaking my truth to someone who responded with love rather than rejection showed me that my experiences, however painful, didn't make me damaged goods or unworthy of healthy relationships. David and I were married in June of 1963, 1 week after my college graduation. It was a simple ceremony in the small Methodist church that Aunt Patricia attended, with Father walking me down the aisle, and tears of joy rather than sorrow filling my eyes for the first time in years. Our early married years were challenging in all the normal ways that young marriages are. But we had built our relationship on a foundation of honesty and shared values that served us well through every difficulty. David took a job as a reporter at the Charlotte Observer, starting at the bottom, with dreams of eventually running his own newsroom. I began teaching 5th grade at an elementary school in Charlotte, quickly earning a reputation as the teacher who could reach the difficult children that others had given up on. I had developed an almost supernatural ability to recognize the signs of trauma in children, the behaviors that other educators labeled as disruptive or defiant, but which I understood as survival mechanisms developed by children trying to protect themselves. The quiet ones who never spoke unless directly questioned. The aggressive ones who fought first and asked questions later. The children who hoarded food in their desks or couldn't concentrate because they were too busy scanning their environment for potential dangers. "Margaret has a magic touch with troubled kids," my principal, Mrs. Elwood, told David at a school function during my 2nd year of teaching. "She seems to understand what they need before they know it themselves." It wasn't magic. It was recognition born from shared experience and a determination never to let another child suffer the way I had suffered. One student in particular changed my understanding of my own calling and potential impact. Tommy Harrison was 8 years old, small for his age, with nervous habits and an inability to sit still that drove other teachers to distraction. He had been held back twice and was on track to be placed in special classes for children who were deemed unable to learn. I recognized the signs immediately. During recess, while other children played games and formed friendships, Tommy would find isolated spots where he could watch all the entrances to the playground. He flinched when adults moved quickly near him. He never wanted to stay after school for extra help, even when he desperately needed it. "Tommy," I said one afternoon when we were alone in the classroom, "would you like to help me organize the supply closet? I could use an extra pair of hands, and we could talk while we work." It was busy work, really, but it gave us time together in a safe space where he could talk if he wanted to, without the pressure of formal counseling or interrogation. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said suddenly while sorting pencils by color, "do you think some kids are just naturally bad people?" The question hit me like a physical blow, so familiar was the reasoning behind it. "What do you mean by that, Tommy?" Like, what if they make bad things happen to their families? What if it's their fault when grown-ups get angry and do mean things to them? I knelt down so we were at eye level, choosing my words with the care of someone who understood that this moment could change a child's entire future. Tommy, I said gently but firmly, children are never ever responsible for the bad choices that adults make. Never. If a grown-up hurts a child, it's because something is wrong with the grown-up, not because the child did anything wrong or bad. He looked at me with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Really? Even if the grown-up says it's the kid's fault? Really. And if someone is hurting you, it's okay to tell a teacher or another safe adult about it. You won't get in trouble for telling the truth, I promise you that. That conversation led to Tommy's disclosure that his stepfather had been physically abusing him for months, leaving bruises in places where teachers wouldn't normally see them. It led to a call to Child Protective Services, Tommy's removal from that dangerous home, and placement with his loving grandmother, and the stepfather's eventual arrest and conviction. More importantly, it led to Tommy's complete academic and emotional transformation. Once he felt safe, once he wasn't spending all his mental energy watching for danger and bracing for the next assault, he proved to be remarkably intelligent and creative. By the end of that school year, he had not only caught up to grade level, but was beginning to excel beyond it. "You saved that boy's life," Mrs. Elwood told me at our year-end faculty meeting. But I knew better. I had simply seen him, believed him, and created the space for him to save himself, with the help of caring adults who put his safety first. It was a lesson that would guide my approach to working with traumatized children for the rest of my career. Over the next several years, I built a reputation as an educator who specialized in reaching children who had experienced trauma, abuse, or neglect. I developed classroom techniques for creating environments where scared children could begin to feel safe. I learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated a child might be suffering at home. Most importantly, I became someone that children trusted with their secrets, because they sensed that I would believe them and take action to protect them. In 1967, I was offered a position as an elementary school counselor, a relatively new role that would allow me to work specifically with children facing various emotional and behavioral challenges. It felt like the natural culmination of everything I had been working toward since leaving the mountains. But life rarely follows the neat paths we lay out for ourselves. That same year, David was offered a position as assistant editor at a newspaper in Raleigh, a significant advancement in his career that would require us to relocate. And just weeks later, I discovered that I was pregnant with our first child. Suddenly, all my carefully planned professional goals were thrown into question. Could I continue my work with traumatized children while raising a child of my own? How would my own experiences with abuse affect my ability to be a good mother? Was I emotionally strong enough to create the kind of safe, loving home environment that every child deserves? The questions kept me awake at night, but they also forced me to confront how far I had come in my healing journey. The frightened 12-year-old who had endured months of abuse in terrified silence had become a woman that parents and educators trusted to protect their most vulnerable children. The teenager who had struggled to make a single friend was now someone that others turned to for wisdom and guidance. Maybe, I thought, as I felt our baby moving inside me for the first time, I was ready for this next chapter of my life after all. Maybe my experiences, as painful as they had been, had prepared me to be exactly the kind of mother my child would need. As I sit here in my sunny kitchen on this crisp October morning in 2023, watching my great-granddaughter Emma chase fallen leaves in the backyard where her grandmother Catherine once played hopscotch, I am struck by the miraculous nature of healing and the power of breaking destructive cycles through courage and love. "Great-grandma, why are you crying when you're writing your happy story?" Emma asks, appearing at my elbow with leaves in her hair and dirt on her small hands. I set down my pen. Yes, I still write by hand the way Miss Roberts taught me all those years ago, and pull this precious child onto my lap, breathing in the scent of fresh air and innocence that clings to her like perfume. Sometimes people cry happy tears when they think about how good life turned out, even after scary things happened. I explain, marveling at how easily I can now talk about difficult subjects with children. I'm writing about some sad things that happened to me when I was a little girl, but also about all the wonderful things that came after, like having your Grandma Catherine and your mommy, and most especially you. Emma considers this with the serious expression that reminds me so much of Catherine at the same age. Were you scared for a long time? Yes, sweetheart, I was. But I learned that being scared doesn't have to last forever, especially when you tell safe grown-ups about what's frightening you. And sometimes, scary experiences teach us how to help other people who are scared. Like how Mommy helps sad kids at her work. Exactly like that. Emma wiggles off my lap and returns to her leaf chasing, leaving me to reflect on the extraordinary legacy that has grown from those dark seeds planted so long ago. Now, let me tell you about the letter I found after Grandfather Cornelius's funeral in 2005. The final piece of the puzzle that helped me understand the complete story of my childhood trauma and recovery. When the nursing home called to say he had died, I attended his funeral not out of forgiveness or obligation, but as a witness to the end of a chapter that had shaped so much of my life's work. After the simple service, the funeral director handed me an envelope. "He left this for you specifically," the man said. "Asked that it be given to you after his burial." Inside was a single sheet of paper written in the shaky handwriting of an old man near death. "Margaret, I know you will never forgive me, and you shouldn't. I destroyed your childhood and caused you pain that probably lasted your whole life. I have thought about what I did to you every single day for 50 years. I want you to know that I wrote letters to your father starting in 1957, trying to confess what I had done and ask for help to stop. I was too cowardly to stop on my own, but too guilty to continue without trying to get help. Your father kept those letters. Maybe someday you will read them and understand that he knew and he was trying to find the right way to protect you. I am glad you became someone who protects children. I am glad my evil didn't destroy your ability to do good in the world. I am sorry. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. Cornelius Sullivan." My hands shook as I read those words, my heart racing as I remembered the strange behavior I had noticed in Father during those final weeks before our confrontation. Now I understood completely. He had been wrestling with the knowledge of what was happening, trying to find the courage and the right moment to act. That evening, I called Father, who was then 87 years old, but still sharp and alert. "Papa," I said, "I received a letter from Grandfather Cornelius today. He mentioned that he had written to you in 1957 confessing what he was doing to me. Is that true?" There was a long pause before Father answered, his voice heavy with old pain and regret. "Yes, Margaret. I've carried the guilt of those letters for nearly 50 years. I should have acted the moment I received the first one, but I was so shocked, so confused about what to do. I needed time to process what he was telling me to watch and confirm what was happening before I could act. Why didn't you ever tell me about the letters?" "Because I didn't want you to carry the additional burden of knowing that I had known and delayed acting. I wanted you to remember me as the father who protected you when you found the courage to tell me, not as the father who failed to act quickly enough when he had written evidence of what was happening." "Papa," I said, tears streaming down my face, "you didn't fail me. When I finally told you what was happening, you believed me immediately and protected me completely. That's what mattered most. The letters show that you were trying to find the right way to handle an impossible situation." That conversation helped me understand the final piece of my healing puzzle. Father had been carrying his own burden of guilt for decades, believing he had failed me by not acting immediately upon receiving Grandfather Cornelius's confessions. But I could see now that he had been trying to protect me in the best way he knew how, gathering evidence and courage before confronting a situation that would destroy our family as we knew it. The programs I helped develop in North Carolina became national models for trauma-informed education and child protection. The Margaret Sullivan Center for Child Safety, which David and I established in 1985, has now trained educators in all 50 states and 12 countries. We've created resources that have helped millions of children find their voices and get the help they needed before years of silence could compound their suffering. Catherine grew up to become a clinical psychologist, specializing in childhood trauma, carrying forward our family's commitment to protecting the most vulnerable members of society. "I always knew I wanted to do what you do, Mom," she told me on the day she opened her private practice. "You showed me that our worst experiences can become our greatest sources of strength when we choose to transform pain into purpose." Her daughter Sarah followed a similar path, becoming a pediatric social worker who specializes in child abuse cases. "Great-grandma," she told me recently, "your story gave me the courage to do this work, knowing that recovery and healing are possible even after the worst trauma." Tommy chose journalism like his father, but his reporting has focused specifically on investigative work that exposes institutional failures to protect children. His Pulitzer Prize-winning series on sexual abuse in youth sports organizations led to sweeping policy changes and numerous criminal prosecutions. "Every story I write is ultimately about giving voice to people who haven't been heard," he says. "That's what you taught me matters most." David and I shared 48 wonderful years together before cancer took him in 2011. Even during his final weeks, he was working on a book about how communities can create cultures of child protection. I finished the manuscript for him, and every copy sold contributes to the scholarship fund we established for trauma survivors who want to pursue careers in helping professions. My siblings both thrived in ways that honored our mother's memory and our father's protection. Daniel became a veterinarian with the help of a scholarship that Aunt Patricia established for him, channeling his childhood fascination with animals into a career dedicated to healing creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. Anna followed her calling to become an elementary school principal, drawn to create safe learning environments for children. We remained close throughout our lives, bonded not just by shared tragedy, but by shared resilience and determination to live fully despite what we had endured. Father lived until he was 89, working until his final years as a volunteer reading mentor at the local elementary school. He never remarried after Mother's death, but he found deep joy in his role as grandfather and great-grandfather, delighting in every milestone achieved by each new generation of our family. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition of my life's work came in the form of letters, dozens of them over the years, from former students like Tommy Harrison, who went on to dedicate their lives to helping others. Let me read you one that arrived just last month. "Dear Mrs. Sullivan, you probably don't remember me, but you were my 5th grade teacher in Charlotte 40 years ago. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and you helped me find the courage to tell someone about my uncle's abuse. Because of your intervention, I got help within weeks instead of suffering for years. I wanted you to know that I just retired after 30 years as a Child Protective Services investigator. Your belief in me when I was 8 years old shaped my entire career and probably saved hundreds of other children. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. With gratitude, Jennifer." Reading letters like this, I understand that the pain I experienced as a child has been transformed into healing and hope for generations of children. The cycle of trauma that touched my life has been replaced by cycles of protection, healing, and empowerment. To anyone reading this who has experienced trauma, your story matters. Your healing matters. Your voice matters. The world needs what you have learned, what you have survived, what you have overcome. There is purpose waiting in your pain if you choose to find it. To anyone who works with children in any capacity, thank you. Your willingness to see, to listen, to act when action is needed makes you a hero in ways you may never fully understand. To anyone who has the power to protect children, parents, teachers, neighbors, coaches, religious leaders, policymakers, community members, please use that power. Here are 3 simple steps that can save a child's life. Listen without judgment when a child tries to tell you something is wrong. Believe them immediately. Children rarely lie about abuse. Take action quickly by contacting professionals who can help. My name is Margaret Claire Sullivan. I am 78 years old, a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, a retired educator, a mother and grandmother, and great-grandmother, and someone who has spent 7 decades learning that our worst experiences can become our greatest sources of strength when we choose to transform pain into purpose, silence into voice, and darkness into light. If you are in darkness now, please hold on tight to hope. Dawn is coming, I promise you. And when it arrives, you may discover, as I did, that you have everything you need, not just to heal, but to help others find their way to the light as well. For immediate help with childhood trauma and abuse, National Child Abuse Hotline 1-800-4A-CHILD 1-800-422-4453. Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741741. Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline 1-800-422-4453. Remember, you are believed, you are valued, you are not alone.